Hi there, and welcome back to the channel. So today, September 30th, 1955, is a particularly significant day for me personally, as I was a very big James Dean fan, and this is the day that he was killed. He was killed on his way to a race in Central California in his Porsche 550 Spider with his mechanic Rolf Weatherich. Rolf survived, but Jimmy was killed when he was trapped in his car, flipped over a few times, broke his neck, and killed him. And his sort of philosophy of life that he espoused was to live fast, die young, and leave a good-looking corpse. And that's exactly what he did, because he died at the age of 24. But for me, he was a massive inspiration, because when I was about 14, 15 years old, this was like 83, 84. I remember I was in 9th, 10th grade, sort of that space. And I was kind of a juvenile delinquent myself in those days, kind of, exploring that end of things, and I had gotten in trouble, and I was actually sent home from school, and so I was at home, and I was watching TBS, and suddenly they did a little thing where they were showing James Dean movies every day, and they showed East of Eden first, the first one, then Rebel Without a Cause, and then Giant. So I saw all three movies back to back, in a span of 3 days. And it completely blew my mind. He blew my mind as an actor and as a presence. And then when I started reading about what was happening, what he brought to the world, I think he was like the first teenager, really, because teenage culture had not really been a thing in America yet. It was the post-World War II boom that created the teenager. People moved to the suburbs, there was automobiles, people had jobs, you could afford to live on one salary, that type of thing. So it created family life and kids that suddenly had interest and a life of their own that they could express through the media. And I think that James Dean, Marlon Brando, Montgomery Clift, John Garfield, those guys were first, but they didn't specifically play teenagers. James Dean was the one who played the teenager in Rebel. Even though he was 24 years old, he was playing like a 17, 18-year-old. But I really see him as like the first teenager and the beginning of that form of expression, because right after James Dean died, September 30th, 55, the following year, just a few months later, Elvis breaks. And now you had music to go along. You had a film star, James Dean, and you had music, Elvis, to go along with this sort of rebellion thing, this Blackboard Jungle thing that was going on. And to me, James Dean is the king of it. He remains the only name that, besides Brando, that's associated with this culture from this era. And he's still a powerful presence. And the reason is because he was an amazing actor, but because he was captured in these three great films, and he never did any other movies, so he never had time to sort of ruin his legacy. He's got this sort of perfect legacy. And the fact that his own personal complexities, his lifestyle, the way he conducted himself, and the angst that he was able to portray on film created a massive fan base and a almost religious devotion to him as an actor and as a person. And it had a profound effect on me. And this book was the really greatest thing that ever happened to me. It was almost like a Bible. Like for a religious person, this was like a Bible to me. I was so heavily into it. Everything from the artwork on the cover, this pointillist photograph of him, this pointillist portrait with this amazing sort of artwork, the photos in it. This is David Dalton, and he's a well-known rock and roll writer. Morrissey also wrote a book about James Dean. If you want to try to track that down, it's several $1,000s, but thousands of dollars, but on the collector's market. But this book is fantastic, and it's a hagiography basically. It's everything about it is it's like the James Dean myth and legend. It's all in here. And I don't know how much of it is true. There's a lot of stories that came out about Jimmy that have a lot more details and stuff, but this has all the main and plain stuff that makes the story so fascinating to me. The pictures in it, everything about it. And I studied this, like I said, religiously. And the main influence that, when I think about it now as an adult, that I think James Dean provided me was watching somebody completely commit to their craft, and that really had a profound effect. He was a very committed actor during a time period where acting was not seen as a serious art, especially film acting. Now, theater acting was, but film acting was not seen as an artistic pursuit so much. And Jimmy brought the art to it. And he was a method actor. He studied briefly with Lee Strasberg, but I think he was just a genius natural. He didn't really need to study. He already had it all, inside of him. And so even though he was a method actor, I don't see him as like the ultimate example of a actor studio actor, because he kind of did his own thing and he didn't really study there. He was just a genius right out of the box. He didn't need a lot of training. He just needed somebody to cast him in some amazing films, which is exactly what happened. But anyway, he had like a major death wish. He had a lot of psychological issues and problems and things like that, which made him even more interesting to a young person to read about, because at that age, I think that we're mostly interested in flawed heroes. That's part of the youthful pursuit, is to have a Heathcliff type of hero. And I think of James Dean as being like that. And the tragic, he's young forever, he's like a 24-year-old forever. And but mainly, the main thing I took away from the James Dean experience was the inspiration to do your best and to have passion, and I think the more I've learned about Jimmy, the more I realized that his true passion was racing cars, not acting. And that might have been part of his what was making him such an unhappy person, besides all the psychological trauma he suffered in his youth. His mother died when he was young, his father abandoned him, so he was a damaged person, and as an artist, that all sort of came out onto the screen. So James Dean to me was like a god. I mean, I had him on a massive pedestal, and he was a person who inspired me to be an artist. At that time, I was still an actor, but in my music, it was inspiring me on every level, because I saw him as a person who had just fully committed to his craft and really put his heart and soul into his work. And so while I was watching the James Dean movies and discovering Rebel Without a Cause and all that stuff, it was a magical time in my life, and I hold it dear, because I really think that's the kind of thing that artists should do. They should find things that inspire them and then try to figure out why it's inspiring you and make the most of it, really make the most of it. So my James Dean obsessions continued. Like when I was an actor, I thought about him a lot, and I wanted to get as close to that style of acting as I could, learn about it as much as I could. I ended up living in Los Angeles because of this. I met my mentor, Bruce Glover, and I'll do a full episode about him, because I really believe that mentors are super important, and he's one of the genius actors of the 20th century, and I was incredibly fortunate to be in his presence. And so I learned a lot of things about James Dean. And then my roommate, my good friend Robert, he actually worked for Bill Bast, who was James Dean's friend and roommate at UCLA. And so he ended up meeting Dizzy Sheridan, who was James Dean's girlfriend at one point, all kinds of crazy stuff. So we got really close to the James Dean camp. And it was really amazing to just know that he was real. And at one point, Robert even took Bill Bast's mother to a eye appointment, like a doctor appointment. And when he took her back to her house, she had a little shrine of pictures and little notes that Jimmy had written her. Just amazing, fascinating experience to have gotten that close to the whole James Dean experience. And around this time period, I guess it was, I went back to Los Angeles, and I was living there with my wife in the year 2000. And it was my birthday, and we were sort of like, there's always so many amazing things to do in LA. And I'm kind of a homebody, but when I was in LA, I tried to do as many things as I could, because I knew that I probably wouldn't be out there forever. And there was just so many amazing things that I was interested in that you can experience out there. And so we were kind of thumbing through the paper, and she said, "Oh, Rebel Without a Cause. They're doing a Rebel Without a Cause screening at the John Edson Ford Theater, which is in the MoMA, the Modern Art Museum. Yeah, it's in Miracle Mile near the Tar Pits in LA." So she was like, "They're doing a screening of Rebel Without a Cause, and some of the cast is supposed to be there." And I was like, "Oh man, I got to go to this. I mean, it's the Rebel Without a Cause. This is like the culmination of. I'm in my 30s now, and all this time I've been this James Dean fanatic. I'm living in Los Angeles, and here's my chance to go see Rebel on the big screen with the surviving cast members. And Rebel was made in 1954, and this was 2000, so this is almost 50 years later. So I was expecting, you know, people to be older, you know, old, and so we decided to go, and I was super excited. The theater's amazing. I love that museum. We had seen a Chagall thing there. It was awesome. So I went to the theater, and we walked in, and I immediately noticed and recognized the cast of Rebel Without a Cause. They weren't wearing leather jackets, and they didn't have greased back hair. They were like, you know, older people with suits and dresses and stuff like that on, but they were immediately recognizable. I remember, I'm going to try to get their names here. Obviously, James Dean was dead, Natalie Wood is dead, Sal Minio's gone, Jim Backus is gone, and Doran's gone, but Corey Allen was there. Who else is there? Edward Platt was dead. My mom, another weird coincidence, when my mom was a kid in Midland, Texas, she appeared on a little show because she won this contest to the television, and she won these six-shooter guns, like cowboy six-shooter guns, and it was on the Eddie Platt show. Eddie Platt leaves Texas a couple years later, ends up becoming a big-time actor in Hollywood. He ends up on the TV show Get Smart, but before Get Smart, he plays the detective in Rebel Without a Cause. So that was another neat connection for me personally. But I saw Beverly Long was there, Steffi Sidney. Those are the girls that played Helen and Mill from the film. And Jack Grenage was there. So Jack and Steffi and the other girl, Beverly, were all sitting together. And so I saw them sitting there, and I was like, oh, let's sit in front of them. You know, I told my wife that let's sit in front of them because they'll probably have some cool stories, you know. So, and they were kind of in the middle of the theater. So we walk down and we sit in front of them. And so I'm just got my ears pinned to the back so I can hear everything they're saying. And they're saying, oh, Jimmy would have just thought this was ridiculous that he got so famous. He would have just been so bothered by all this. You know, that's what they were saying. I heard them saying that. And they were like, oh, he hated any kind of screening. He hated going to theaters. And so that was amazing just to hear them talking about Jimmy, you know. And so they go on with a few things like that. And then suddenly they go, oh, you know what, we should probably be up front, because they're going to want us to talk or whatever, so we're going to go up front. So Jack and Steffi and Beverly get up, and they walk to the front of the theater, and I'm like, oh, darn. And then I saw Frank Mazzola, and Frank Mazzola was in a LA gang, and he actually was a technical advisor, and he was the one who took Jimmy out and introduced him to the kids in a gang, and that's where Jimmy sort of learned how to behave like a kid in a gang in LA in 1955. That was, what we were supposed to be doing. So they all moved down to the front of the theater. And so traditionally, my wife and I always sit in the back of the theater, so if we want to get gone, we can really quickly. We don't disturb anyone. So I was like, let's just move to the back, since they're gone now, we don't get to hear these neat stories. I don't want to bother them and be a weirdo and follow them around, so we'll just go to the back in case we get tired of this and we can just leave. Because I'd already kind of soaked up a bunch of the atmosphere, and, I didn't know what was going to happen next, so we just moved to the very back row. I remember the back row had like less seats than the rest. It's like there was more seating as you went down the rows, so there's only like a few seats back there on that very back row. And so we sit down, and the opening credits are coming up, CinemaScope, James Dean, the red titles, and the little monkey that's banging the cymbals, and James Dean opens the scene. He's drunk, he's like laying on the street. It's an amazing opening shot. And suddenly I look over to my left, and the door pops open a little bit. It's a dark theater. Door opens up a little bit, and you can see like a slant of light. And Dennis Hopper sticks his head in the door. And I was like, oh my God, that's Dennis Hopper. And he looks over at us, and he checks the aisle real quick, and I see him do a quick count. He goes, 1, 2, 3, all good. Turns his back on us. Suddenly they emerge. He walks first, sits right next to my wife right here. So I'm here, my wife is here, Mary. Right next to her is Dennis Hopper. Dennis Hopper's wife, and then Dennis Hopper's son. He was a little blonde child. He couldn't have been older than like 10 years. He was like the age of my youngest daughter right now. He's like 10 years old, like little guy with blonde hair. Looked just like Dennis Hopper, like a little miniature Dennis Hopper. They're sitting right next to us. And I'm just completely speechless. to even understand the culmination of being in the presence of Dennis Hopper, for me personally, was mind-boggling, because Dennis Hopper is ultimately the guy who influenced, this is the Death Chair, this is a Dennis Hopper thought experiment. So Dennis Hopper kind of goes nuts, you know, in the 70s, 80s. I don't know exactly what went down, but he went through some stuff. So after Rebel Without a Cause, Dennis Hopper becomes a counterculture director. He has a breakthrough and sort of becomes the hippie director. So the same way that James Dean broke through in the 50s in Blue Minds, Dennis Hopper sort of takes the mantle of James Dean and does it in the 60s in the same kind of way, in a big way. And so now Easy Rider has the same sort of, you know, prominence and impact on the culture that Rebel had. It's really kind of amazing. He ended up directing the last movie, which is a brilliant picture. Dennis was too much of a great artist to really be a successful long-term Hollywood director. To be a director like that and have long-term success, you got to play the game, and Dennis Hopper never played the game. He was a true artist. Another film, Out of the Blue. And this is where we start getting into my entire inspiration for this band. This Dynamite Death Chair thing comes from my love of Linda Manns, Dennis Hopper, from the movie Out of the Blue that Dennis Hopper directed. So I will make a video about that, Dennis Hopper, Linda Manns, and the Dynamite Death Chair, because that is one of my biggest inspirations, and that's where this death chair came. So my affection for Dennis Hopper was massive. I really looked up to him. He was another person that had been a major inspiration to me. So to have him sitting here at this moment was incredible. I mean, just absolutely incredible. I could not believe it. And luckily, because we were in a movie theater, I wasn't able to bug him with a bunch of stupid questions or screw things up. So then I remember, oh, the time I met Dennis Hopper, I did something really stupid, because I did that a couple times with some famous people that I'd looked up to. You know, I've met a few people like that, and just, they don't even remember, because they don't need any new friends and they don't care about you anyway. But you remember how you behaved, and it gives you a bad memory if you feel like you blew it. And luckily, I didn't say anything to him. It was like the perfect experience. I didn't have any time to ask him any stupid questions or anything, because we were watching the movie. So there was no way to do anything dumb. I just got to hang out with him for the duration of the film. So anyway, we're watching the movie. I remember the credits start. I look over, they all pile in, and I was like dumbfounded. I couldn't believe it. And I couldn't even imagine what he must have been thinking, you know, like what he thought all of these people, you know, must be thinking in their minds. It's just weird. But at one point, I wanted to look over at him, but I didn't want him to see me like weirding out and looking at him like a weirdo. So I just sort of slowly turned my head. I was like, slowly, little by little, I got my eyes kind of like this, and I slowly turned my head, and I got to where I could see my wife, and I kept turning my head slowly. I was like, okay, eventually I'm going to see Dennis, and he won't notice I'm looking at him, and I'll just get to look at him for a second while we're sitting here. So I looked a little, I got my head a little closer, finally I got all the way to him, and when I did, he was looking right at me, grinning. I guess he knew what I was doing, and he just went like this. And I was like, and I just back at him. Oh man, I can't even tell you. It was, and like I said, luckily I didn't do anything stupid to screw it up. So we watched the whole movie. I couldn't even believe I was watching this thing with him. I still can't believe it. The lights come up, and the rest of the cast begins to assemble on the stage. So we have Corey Allen, who played Buzz, Frank Mazzola, who kind of organized the whole thing. What a bright guy he was. The girls, Jack Bernage, you know, Steffi Sidney, Beverly Long, these amazing women that were there. And so they all, you know, congregate on the stage. I think they had Seymour Stein was there too, the writer, which is really was really cool. Stuart Stern, sorry, not Seymour Stein. Stuart Stern, he was there. Really amazing. So they all come out, and they're talking, and then suddenly Frank Mazzola says, "Hey, is Dennis Hopper here?" And suddenly Dennis just pops up out of his seat. You know, he's sitting next to us. He's sitting next to Mary. He pops up out of his seat, just kind of jogs down to the front, and the whole place erupted. Everybody stands up because Dennis was the biggest star. Besides James Dean, Dennis Hopper had a massive career, as I've said, you know, the Easy Rider thing and all that. So to have him be there, Blue Velvet, River's Edge, all these amazing performances. To have him be there was, a great thing for this event. And all of the other people were excited. So when he gets there, he does an amazing job. It was really something special to watch. He made sure that each member of the cast got some recognition, that he told them himself that they gave an amazing performance. And it was just really something to watch. I could tell these people were just like anybody. They all wanted to succeed. They all wanted to be in this film. They all were working together. They were all mesmerized and blown away by James Dean. At one point during the making of the movie, Dennis Hopper pulls James Dean aside and says, "Hey man, what is it that you're doing? You've got to tell me what you're doing." And James Dean said, "Stop acting. Stop acting. All right? If you're going to smoke a cigarette, smoke the cigarette. Don't smoke the cigarette like an actor. Smoke the cigarette, all right? Just stop acting." It's the first thing he told him. So, it was significant. And the rest of the cast was deferring to Dennis, and instead, Dennis turned the whole thing back onto them. He talked about the women, how great they were, and how great their characterizations was. He went over the top on Buzz, Corey Allen. And Corey Allen had had success as a television director. So he was very similar to Dennis. He just didn't have that massive success that Dennis had, but he was an amazing talent as well. Really good director, Corey Allen. The writer, Stuart Stern, Dennis went over the top about him. Frank Mazzola, gang member, actor. Oh man, brings tears to the eyes, I'm telling you. Jack Grenage, he ended up on Kolchak the Night Stalker. Great actor. Fantastic. These people were fantastic people, fantastic actors. They were all nice, all good people. Dennis Hopper, I wish people could live forever, because that guy was major. His photography, his art collection, he was the real deal. So, the three people that inspired me the most, especially with this particular band, because it all came back to me, was James Dean, Dennis Hopper, and Linda Manz. And I consider them to be the ones that really inspired me. And another neat little side note is our guitar player, Mark Skinner, who is my favorite guitar player. I think he's the best guitar player, basically. Just the best. I've always thought he was. He was born on the day that James Dean died. And that was always like so significant to me when I first met him. I was like, okay, that seals the deal. There was something about that. It's a major coincidence, and I see it as like a synchronicity type deal. All right, James Dean, Dennis Hopper. Next time.